So where are we at when we're looking at the large church? We're thinking like state of the church in the United States. Are we doing well? I think is one of the big questions. Or is there need to say like, hey, we need to shift gears?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's a really important question. And if I'm being honest, I feel ill-equipped to give an accurate assessment of it. It's almost like I feel like if you're going into a doctor and you're asking for the health of the whole body, and my specialty is the foot, because like I have my church
Yeah.
in my geographic region, and I could tell you the health of my church
Yeah.
and how I think that we're doing, and that even is probably a little bit biased. But for me to speak to the rest of the body, now I definitely feel the pains that are being caused by health or lack thereof
Yeah.
in other parts of the body. So I can speak to that. I can speak to, you know, people deconstructing their faith. You've got tons of youth who are leaving the church, and youth group attendance or youth engagement, I would say, which is often marked by youth group attendance, seems like it's pretty low right now.
Yeah.
And that's not just our church, it's churches across the board. And then I think the authenticity of a lot of what I see in youth, because I happen to have 6 kids, and four of them, I would put in the youth demographic still.
Yeah.
And what they see among churchgoers in their age group is not super encouraging.
Okay.
And so I think there's a lack of authenticity, or a lack of just real life-changing faith in Jesus in across the board, but I see it a lot specifically in the youth, and that concerns me. I don't know that we're giving them the best experience, or really teaching them what it means to really follow Jesus and give your life to Him, and that concerns me.
That's interesting. I'm not as familiar with the where we're at stat wise on youth. I mean,
Mhm.
I have seen like record numbers of young people leaving faith.
Yeah.
Um, then you recently planted a church,
Yes.
and I would put you on like you're on the growing side
We are.
of church.
We've
So like
grown 50% in 3 years. We've grown 50% year 1 to year 2, and 50% year 2 to year 3.
so I appreciate you. I mean, there is this like what's happening broadly with church, but then I feel like possibly in your own network where you're seeing
Mm-hmm.
growth,
Yeah.
which is important because we see currents where there's currents of growth,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's also maybe even larger currents where they're not seeing growth,
Yeah.
and then there's even
Or
and then
shrinkage.
there's a lot of like fights between of like we don't want to look like that, or you know what I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
people who want to see growth but aren't willing to make changes, or people who are seeing growth that people say like, well, it's compromises.
Yeah.
But let's get into like why did you feel the need to plant a church?
Sure. Um, well, first off, I felt called, and I would encourage anybody who is considering planting a church, do not do it unless you're called, because it is not easy, and there's a lot of people that struggle in church planting, and I think part of the reason is because they're doing it because they're not called,
Hmm.
and they're doing it, and so they're struggling in a place where God never intended for them to struggle. And so first and foremost, don't do it unless you're called. I felt called to plant a church, but one of the things that was a burden that I had was not seeing a lot of salvations in the church I was attending. So knowing that I had a burden in my heart to be in the vocational ministry, field, and then also not seeing some things happening at my church, which wasn't a mega church. We had 400 or 500 people on a Sunday, and it was a healthy church as far as like
Yeah.
numerical, sort of statistics go. But I didn't see a lot of growth from salvations. I saw a lot of growth from transference.
Yeah.
So unchurched people didn't find our church accessible, because the way that we did worship was, we had like 2-hour services, and the way that we used language
Yeah.
assumed that we had a churched culture and churched people were coming in, and didn't assume that there were unchurched people who couldn't access
Yeah.
what we were saying. So that that was something that I really wanted to change and do differently. And then I wanted to see salvations. I wanted to see people who were unchurched not just come and feel like, okay, I kind of get this, but I wanted to see their lives actually go from far from God to walking closely with Him and producing fruit. And there wasn't a lot of that happening because we had people that we were just discipling and in their life, just helping them walk through the phases of their life. So when you have 400 people that you got to care for and feed, I think it's easier to stop focusing on people that are outside the fold and bringing them into the fold.
Yeah.
And I do know this, that most salvations occur within the first 5 years of a church plant. That's when they experience the greatest number of salvations. And many churches that have been in existence for 10 years or more don't really see a lot of growth in the way of new believers. They see transference. They'll see, families continue to grow in their church, but they don't see a lot of salvations happen.
Yeah.
And that is actually what scares me more than anything else, is that it's almost like you've got churches that plant and they're really excited because they want to win souls.
Yeah.
But statistically, it doesn't make sense that passion, if that's the passion that launched you, it wouldn't be the passion that sustains you. So it actually kind of scares me a little bit, because I wonder if church planters plant the church so they can have the big church, and once they get there, once their first 5 years are kind of in the rearview mirror and they've seen a lot of people come into their church, then they put it into cruise control and they lose their passion for the lost. I don't know why.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
it's because they get into the business of doing the work with the families that they've got. Like, I've got so much stuff going on, I just need to sort of sustain. And I heard one pastor say it this way. We said, "What's your growth strategy?" And he said, "Our growth strategy is to not lose anybody." I'm like, I don't know if that's Jesus' growth strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you said this, correct me if I'm wrong, we're not planting enough churches.
We're not planting enough churches, regardless of what the stats say.
And yet there's this paradox where you see smaller churches getting smaller right now and bigger churches getting bigger. The other day, like, I have a friend who's working on a church plant. And one of the questions I get is like, well, why didn't you just do all that stuff in that church? There's still, it feels like so much friction even within a lot of churches towards church planting and sending people out to do a church plant.
Yes.
If it's not in that, I don't know. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And it's something that perplexes me, because I'm not a career church guy.
Yeah.
Like, I was a military guy, then I was a defense contractor, and now I'm a pastor. And so for me, the goal was never having this big platform. The goal was always just the work of the ministry. And so this is probably assuming too much, but I think church planting is hard. It's not easy to do. And now that I have planted a church, I can affirm that even more strongly, that it's not easy building a team and getting the team to be committed and getting them to come in and set up a portable church and have your worship team and your Man of Kids team and all your systems in place. That's not an easy thing to do. And then to take that and say, oh, by the way, we're going to give you an opportunity because Joe here is such a anointed guy. We know that God's called him to be a leader and minister in a unique way somewhere else. And we know they need a church over there. So let's cannibalize what we've built here.
Yeah.
And instead of taking steps forward, let's take some steps backwards in order to let them take steps forward. That's a really hard thing, I think, for ministers to do. And I think part of it's because their identity gets wrapped up in how big their church is, or how excellent their production is. And having a big church is good because people are numbers. Like numbers matter because numbers are people. There's a whole book of the Bible called Numbers. Numbers matter. But
you can tell in a church culture when it feels like it's about the numbers or when it's about people are here and people need to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but I think it's hard for pastors to say, yeah, you go ahead, take 100 of my people and my people, right? Take 100 of my people and go and launch a church somewhere else to minister to 300 or 400 more there. I think we forget where the actual goalpost is.
Hey friends, we're going to jump right back in the interview, but I want to take a moment and highlight Ordinary Movement. So let's say that you are the typical ordinary man, ordinary woman. You love Jesus, but you've never been discipled. You don't even know what a disciple is. You don't know where to start. You don't know if you could lead a group. Well, listen, we have made Ordinary Movement simple, scalable, highly reproducible, and we've taken all the guesswork out of discipleship and made it exactly for people like you. So you can come in, we have a training. It sets you up with everything you need to know about how to lead a group, how to launch a group. It walks you through the discipleship process. So you're not just getting information and telling people information. You're learning practices and how you actually work with people relationally and developmentally so that your group isn't just in a knowledge acquisition loop, but is actually growing spiritually, having deep, real conversations, and challenged in a healthy way because they love Jesus to be multipliers, to be people who end up living a lifestyle of disciple making. And so check out ordinarymovement.com. You can learn about the men's track, the women's track, or our co-ed track, more about our discipleship process, all of our resources there. Also, if you're listening to this interview and you are a pastor and you recognize there is a void perhaps in your church in the disciple-making movement side or the discipling culture, or perhaps you just want to see more results on disciple-making and less just religious routine and culture like that, then I want to invite you to check out ordinarymovement.com as well. Go to the church page. There you'll see all of our common questions that pastors often ask us. There's also a framework page where we introduce to you some of the best practices as far as introducing Ordinary Movement into your church. And let me just mention, this was not designed to be something that you have to lead, that you have to micromanage. It's simply something that you can integrate, that you can identify the right leaders with and ask them to run with it, have them go through the training, and then you're just championing this. You're celebrating the wins. And as a result, through ordinary people, you will see disciple-making movement happen in and then through and then outside of your church, all because you handed it off and said, hey, run with this. And so we're in your corner. We'll do anything we can to support you, to pray with you, to coach you through this. And if you want to learn more about how Ordinary Movement can serve your church in creating disciple-making movement there, go to ordinarymovement.com. All right, back to the interview.
Do you feel like, and maybe this is a baited question, I mean, do you feel like the only way we're going to see the results we want to see in reaching unchurched people is through church planting?
Yes.
What about disciple making through more small group kind of centered approaches?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's yes, both.
Yeah.
It's yes, both. It's not just planting more churches.
And that's the largest scale of kind of the disciple making, because you kind of go from like 1-to-1, 1 to 3 or 5, you know, maybe 1 to 10, 12, and then you kind of get into like your mentoring groups. Then you're like, man, I have this big vision to go out and even reach more people. And you're planting a church, and now you're, coaching teams,
right?
And teams, right?
Yeah, but even in that, so in my personal faith walk with Jesus, I went from being somebody who was being mentored. I'm still somebody who's being mentored, but then I started doing mentorship among other people, and then I became a mentor to people, and then I encouraged them to multiply and be mentors while I still mentored them. And now as a pastor, I still have men that I mentor. Like, I'm not only mentoring leaders. I've heard a lot of leaders talk about that. Like, well, my job now is to only mentor leaders of people. But I don't know. I feel like when you lose touch with that, like one-on-one, and you're only doing the one-to-many, you start to miss what the whole point of it is. And so I just never want to do that. Like, I always want to have a handful of guys that I'm committed to. I mean, here in this room, I was telling you this morning, we had a dozen guys come in, 6 a.m., and we're just meeting and talking about the Word and talking about what it means to do church together and do life together and grow in our walk with Jesus. I don't ever want to stop doing that just so I could have more time to preach more, or more time to be the CEO of our church organization.
Yeah. Do you feel like, I mean, we're talking about churches who are struggling to plant churches, churches who are getting smaller and larger churches are getting larger. There's this need for church planting. I mean, would you say that discipleship through these smaller venues, like small groups, is that something that these churches are also doing or missing broadly?
I think it depends. I know our church and our network is statistically extremely healthy in this. I mean, we have a church of just a little over 200 people on a Sunday, and we have over 30 small groups.
Yeah.
Like that's
wild.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And there are people that, you just doing the math, there are people that are in multiple small groups.
Yeah.
And our biggest church, which is multiple thousands of people, they have upwards of 60% participation in small groups.
Yeah.
And that's just an astronomical number for church world, and it actually creates a lot of health. But I actually think the bigger issue, and this may take it a different direction.
Yeah.
I think the bigger issue when it comes to the health of the church in America is tied up in Jesus' parable of the sower.
What do you mean?
I'm probably a little biased because we're in this series right now.
Okay.
Talking about the parable of the sower. But this has been something that, of all the parables, this one is probably the most important for me when it comes to discipleship.
Okay.
Because what I see in the parable is you've got first off, you've got two different types of people. You've got people who are resistant to the faith, which are represented by those on the path. Yeah. And then you've got people who are receptive to the faith. And in the receptive group, you actually have 5 different types of folks. The 3 types that we want to be is really the fruitful type, 30, 60, and 100-fold.
Yeah.
They produce different types of, or different amounts of fruit.
Yeah.
That's what we want. The other 2 types, though, are interesting because the first one is represented by someone who has rocky soil. So the seed, it says they immediately receive with joy the word.
Yeah.
But because they have no root in themselves, when tribulation or persecution comes because of the word, they wither and die.
Yeah.
And then the second, the other one is someone who, they actually have good soil, but it says that there's thorns and thistles that are planted among it, and it chokes out the life that the seed could produce. And so what I think that we have in the church is a lot of people who have received the word. They're in that second group. So we have the group of the path that are resistant, and those are the ones that we're all focused on, like, oh man, they need to accept the gospel, which is true. But I think our bigger problem is our churches are full of people who've received the word, but they have rocky soil, or they've received the word and they have thorns that are growing among it. And the only one that produced fruit was the last kind. The one that received it, they produced 30, 60, 100-fold. And Jesus himself said in John 15 that I'm the vine, you are the branches. Yeah. Any branch in me that does not produce fruit is taken away by my Father. My Father's going to take it away, and the branches that don't produce fruit are going to be thrown into the fire and burned. So really in that parable, we have branches that are producing foliage, but they're not producing fruit. And I think in the church, we mistake foliage for fruit.
Yeah. And
what we need to be focused on is fruit. And that only happens by the Holy Spirit producing it and in discipleship context, like growing with other people. So I think the real health issue of our church is we have fruitless people who are receiving the word either with joy sometimes, or they're receiving it with other stuff too. It's just like one of the many seeds that are kind of planted in the garden of their heart. Yeah. And they just don't live productive, fruitful lives for Jesus. Yeah. And that, to me, that really scares me. I think.
Do you think they're aware they're not living an unproved?
No, that's the problem.
Yeah,
I think again, this is what frustrates me about some of the way that we do church, big church, is because we can let people get lost and Sometimes they can have a faith that is inauthentic and they're not even aware themselves.
Yeah.
Peter said when he was talking about the trial of our faith. In fact, I've got the verse. If I can
Okay.
read it,
Yeah,
can I read
yeah.
a verse?
Go for it.
Can we get in a little bit of a word here? Peter said this in 1 Peter 1:6-7. He said, "Be truly glad. There's wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while. These trials will show that your faith is genuine. It's being tested as a fire tests and purifies gold, though your faith is far more precious than gold." So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. So we have people who are in our church and they think that they're okay because they receive the word with joy. We're in a low persecution type of environment right now in America. And they will not know that they haven't really had a fruit producing transformation until they meet Jesus, unless there's trial. Like the trial isn't to let Jesus know if they're actually fruitful or not. Jesus knows. God's not going to be duped at the end of the age and be like, "Oh, I thought you were producing fruit, but you weren't."
Yeah.
Like God's not going to be duped. But people, because they have some foliage that's growing, they're going to be duped because when they meet Jesus at the end of the age, he's going to say, "Look, I never knew you." And that concerns me more, is that we have so many people coming to church that Jesus very, very well may say at the end of the age, "I never knew you." But trials actually let us know the authenticity of our faith. Like that's the blessing of it, is it lets us know like, wow, my faith is real. Like it was just tested by fire and it was found to be actually treasured and precious. And I think that we have both the blessing and, I don't want to say curse, but the disadvantage of being in a society where it's so easy to just accept Jesus.
Yeah.
I read a quote when I was a midshipman at Navy. They made me memorize this quote by Thomas Paine, where he's talking about the Revolutionary War, and he said that the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this time of crisis, shrink from the service of his or her country, saying like there are some people who they're happy to be patriots when things are all good.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, "But he who stands it now deserves the love and thanks." And he said, what we gain too cheaply, what we obtain too cheaply, we esteem too lightly. And I think that we have this, Bonhoeffer kind of talked about it a little bit, cheap grace.
Yeah.
We have this cheap grace situation in America, and we've obtained it too cheaply and we esteem it too lightly. And Jesus, if you look at the way that Jesus talked to people, he did a very backwards way of growing the church compared to the way that we do it.
Yeah.
Like there are multiple instances where it says large crowds followed him, and you get almost this moment. I always think about it when I read those sections where it's kind of like Forrest Gump when he's running out on the road and they're all the people like following him, and he stops and he turns around, they're like, "Oh, he's going to say something. He's going to say something." And then he kind of talks to the crowd. And I get this picture that says like large crowds follow Jesus. And then he turns around and he's like, "Anyone who doesn't hate his father and mother can't have any part of me." I'm like, what? Like, why would you say that to this large crowd following you? And then he's like, "You know what? Anybody who doesn't count the cost before he follows me is like someone who decided that they were going to go attack a city and they didn't count how many people it would take to do that. Or a builder who goes to build a house, but they didn't consider what it was going to take to finish it. And in the end, you're going to be disappointed because you're going to realize that you didn't fully count the cost. And anybody who's going to follow me, you need to understand the cost is everything.
Yeah.
There can't be thorns and thistles that grow alongside of me. It's just me. And when the sun starts to burn on you and you're having persecution, like I still have to be enough. And I think we've created a culture that has made it much easier to grow some foliage but not produce any fruit.
Do you feel like we talked about the shift from smaller churches into larger churches. Does that make it easier? I mean, are there these trade-offs?
Well, I'm just thinking visually. If you have a whole field of, if I were to look out on a field of corn, I could see that there are ears of corn growing, but I'm not really going to be able to point out like, oh, that one doesn't have any fruit on it. There's no corn on that stalk. But if it's a much smaller garden,
yeah,
you can see the fruit, and if you have people even in a big context, if you have people caring for groups of stalks, they can tell that there's no fruit and they can tend to it. They can say like, man, the soil here needs a little bit more care.
Yeah.
Let's work on that. But in a big field, you could have lots and lots of stalks just kind of hiding among the fruitful stalks.
So it require a lot more intention then.
It requires a lot more intention.
Yeah.
And it requires more intention at things that big churches don't spend the same proportion of their funds on as other things.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, do big churches spend as much money on discipleship as they do on their online presence? Do they spend as much time talking about how they're discipling people as they do talking about the song set for that Sunday and the lighting sequence?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to beat up excellence, because we focus on excellence on Sundays and how we do our worship experiences. And it's because it's a worshipful moment to the Lord. We want to make it as excellent as possible. But we can't ever forget that we need to be discipling people. We want more people to come in to worship Jesus more freely and excellently.
Yeah. So what do we do with this? Because I mean, clearly, like I hear you painting the picture of like there's solutions, there's a big problem, but it's not like we've got to find a new solution. It's almost like we've just got to do this, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there are plenty of fruitful people in the churches in America. Plenty of fruitful people. And if those fruitful people would care enough for the people who are around them to disciple them and walk with them and do life together with them, I think we would see an exponential increase. Or at least it stands to reason that we would see an exponential increase. Where I always have to temper my expectation, though, and where I think discussions like this can potentially lead us astray, is Jesus managed our expectations when he talked about what it means to follow him or not. And he said, wide is the path and broad is the gate that leads to destruction, and many there be that find it. And straight is the path and narrow is the gate that leads to life, and few there be that find that. So Jesus sort of managed our expectations and said, listen, if you think, and different people's eschatology might lead them to different conclusions on this, but if you think that at the end of the age that everybody's going to have accepted Jesus, that's not what Jesus expected. Like, he expected that there were going to be a lot of people who even thought they were following him, who he would say, no, I didn't even know you. And so he tells us that it's going to be a fewer number who authentically call him Lord and follow him and commit their lives to him. So as hard as we can work and try to serve God in that way, I do think that it's important for us to realize that Jesus did set an expectation that there is the many and there is the few.
Yeah. It's good. Anything else you want to add?
I had a cool little anecdote I could give you.
Okay.
I don't know if it'd be helpful or not.
We'll try it.
But part of the acceptance of Jesus comes with the way you get to the ask. Like in churches, and we do this in our church. I think we said this on a different podcast when we talked about how the sinner's prayer isn't in the Bible, but we treat that in church world as the litmus test for non-believer and believer, as if you said the prayer. And then maybe some churches are more deliberate about it, and they're like, no, you had to actually get baptized, and then we count it. But I think we just make it really like the lowest barrier to entry possible. And I don't think we need to make it difficult to accept Jesus, but Jesus was clear about the cost.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of the different ways that, because I was a Marine, and we always joke about the difference between how the Marine Corps recruits versus how the Army or the Air Force or some of the other services recruit. Because when you go into an Army recruiter or an Air Force recruiter, you can walk in and you can say, so what are you going to give me? What are the incentives? And like, well, look, we're going to pay for your college. We've got this kind of a signing bonus that's going on right now. We'll let you pick your occupational field, and these are the ones that we've got available. Or maybe we'll let you pick your duty station. It's like, great. And they'll go to the next service and we'll ask them.
Yeah.
And then they'll go into the Marine Corps recruiter and they'll say, hey, so the Army told me this, the Air Force told me this. So I got the Hindus told me this, the Buddhists told me this. So like, what's Jesus going to give me? Like Marine Corps, hey, what are you going to give me, Marine Corps? And the Marine Corps is like, get out of here. You can't be a Marine. I'm like, what? No, like what? No, you guys have bonuses. No, you don't have what it takes to be a Marine. Like we're the few, we're the proud. Like that's not how it works, man. And what happens is the ones who are really interested, they consider the cost. And they're like, no, I do have what it takes to be a Marine. And they come back and they don't want to be denied. They're like, no, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And they forget about all the incentives, and what they really want is to be a part of that brotherhood.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how Jesus recruited people.
Yeah.
He didn't say, oh, listen, I mean, obviously he talked about, like my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Well, we know that. But he also did things that were counterintuitive. Like when he told people, hey, if you don't hate your father and mother, you can't follow me.
Yeah.
That just seems weird. Listen, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And John 6:66 says that at that point, many of his disciples walked away. And then he turns and looks at the 12 and he's like, you guys going to leave me too? It's just a really interesting dynamic of how he evangelized people.
Yeah.
And I don't think we do it that way in church now.
Stop provoking.
All
right, that's good.
All right, I hope you enjoyed this interview. We have another one right here. Also, if you missed it, check out the State of the Church introduction video right over here. And be sure to go to ordinarymovement.com to learn all about our platform, our discipleship process, our framework, all the resources and the coaching that we provide to help anyone go from churchgoer to disciple who makes disciples. See you there.